Hello, everybody, and welcome back. We are here again for the next episode of TPL, and we're finally getting into the real heart of our statement on philosophical liberalism. If you've been following along with us so far, you know we've gone through quite a few episodes right now, and it's really just taken us through the preamble. But I guess that shows you something about Chris and myself that we have so much to delve into and analyze and dive deep thinking about with just even our opening statement. But now we are really getting into Article 1, and this is one that I'm really excited for us to start exploring more because I have the sense that as we go through this more in depth, we're going to come up with new insights that we haven't even thought about yet. So I'm really excited to get this one started, and we're just going to start with the beginning of this, the title of what we're exploring, which is the foundations of human nature at our best, and just give you a little teaser, a little taste of what it is that we have to look forward to as we read through this article. But let me turn it over to Chris, and he can read through the opening that we're going to start exploring today and get us started for this new part of our journey.
Yeah, thanks, Joia. It's great to be back on and talking through this. And yes, finally kind of returning to the statement itself. For those of you who are following along, if you recall our last session, we were talking about why the three parts of our statement. Now we're going to dive into part one of that. And the question specifically that animates tonight's discussion or today's discussion, depending on what time zone you're in, is why why do we need to ground in human nature? Why did we start with human nature at our best as our first article in this? And as we kind of alluded to in the first one, you know, and we'll get into now, is it's a part of it's in the name even of philosophical liberalism. Part of our project is to ground the need for and benefits of a free society in a deeper moral and philosophical understanding of human nature. And so for us, as you know, we've talked about our method, even part of even our project is to bring an entrepreneurial first principles approach, which we define as getting to an irreducible primary or foundational truth that can't be further explained, and building from that a new vision or ideal or construction. So that's what we wanted to do, really, is look at what is the nature of human beings, why do we need freedom, or what is the link to freedom, if there is one, if we can make that link, and build from there. And so that's what we sought to do here. That's where we started. And that's what formed ultimately the basis of this entire Article 1, which we're going to get into in this discussion here. But I'll just start by kind of setting the tone and reading the first sentence and the last sentence of our opening paragraph on foundations in human nature at our best, Article 1, because I think that will set the tone of where we ultimately got in this first principles exploration of human nature. And specifically, what we say is that we hold that humanity's highest and best nature is expressed in the archetype of the creator-trader. The creator-trader approach involves integrating seeming polarities of identity, a both-and perspective, in order to realize our fullest complex potential. And those identities most relevant to a flourishing free society include, and then we go on to make four more both and combinations of polarities of identity that we will argue, and we're going to talk about in subsequent sessions as to why we argue are key to a flourishing free society. These are aspects of human nature at our best, in addition to this first one, the ultimate archetype that we've laid out here, the creator-trader ideal. So that's just a starting point of why we started here. And so I'll just pause there, Joy, if you wanted to add anything to that.
The only thing I would really have to add at this point is to reference this back to our project as a whole, which for everyone who has been following along knows that what we're trying to do is articulate a statement of common principles that we think ground the political project of freedom. And we're not trying to create a kind of comprehensive statement. This isn't a full philosophical, metaphysical, ontological system about the nature of humanity. We have a very specific purpose here, which I think you're going to say some beautiful things about why we're even focusing on human nature at our best. This isn't just all about human nature, and it really isn't even everything that you or I could possibly say about human nature at our best. We really try to be selective to just articulate those principles that we thought were most important. And this is even an aspect of our statement where I feel we could possibly be open to more revision potentially, because at least as far as I'm concerned, there are a lot of these both ands that I think are very true. I think we're even going to talk more about that in this conversation. So there is even perhaps room to expand this section of the statement out. And so I'm really curious to talk through it more and even to get feedback from more people and see where this goes.
Yeah, exactly. And I like all that, and we're going to get into that. And I'll just kind of then back up and take the audience on again on a little bit of the insight of our journey
Mhm.
and how we get to there to what's ultimately what you see on the statement on our website. And so, we took this first principles approach, and so we started with the question of what is human nature and what, if anything, is the link to freedom, and with the hope that, or expectation that if we could do that and do it properly, that would even kind of solve the so-called is-ought dichotomy for those of you who are kind of philosophically oriented. But this kind of gets into, can you define a kind of moral choice based on a kind of fundamental truth of in reality? And kind of again trying to tie the link to why we need freedom to human nature. We started by just identifying some of the key aspects of human nature: that we are rational beings, that we have volitional capacity, that is the power of choice, that we're creative beings, but we are also not omniscient nor infallible. I think those are some of the key defining aspects. And so we started to do that and then look for the links to freedom, but which that even on its own, I think, is something a lot of advocates of freedom neglect. And why then I believe, A, I've never found their arguments for freedom as compelling. And then B, I think why advocates of freedom are often on the back foot trying to defend political freedom from its opponents, who often do make moral, i.e., philosophical arguments about human nature being helping other people, that's morality is rooted in that, and that neediness or incapacity is what defines us, and helping, these types of arguments that underlie certainly the arguments against freedom. And I think that we have been at a huge disadvantage, we the real liberals advocating for freedom, because of not having this grounding. So that was just, starting with understanding what we're talking about here, defining it. Um, but then we wanted to go even beyond that, which is, given our project, Joya's and my own backgrounds and just natures as creators and optimistic idealists, we wanted to not just define human nature kind of scientifically or mechanistically, but really a more hopeful and inspiring vision of human nature at its best. Like, let's see, okay, from this identity and some of these key capacities of reason and choice and creativity, what can we make of that? And so the way I even like to think of this is that this is really defining our answer to kind of defining what does it mean to be most human, not just merely human, but most human. And here I'll even just give a nod to great thinker and creator, this guy named Packy McCormick, who writes the Not Boring newsletter on Substack, and also is a VC entrepreneur and successful business builder. And he wrote a piece called Most Human Wins, he was thinking about kind of what does the future of work for humans look like in an AI and increasingly automated technological world that we are fast entering and building. But even there, he was taking a first principles approach to even think philosophically about these questions. And so I love that phrase. And I think it applies directly to what we mean here when we say human nature at our best. This is really us defining what does it mean to be most human. So that, that's kind of, that's maybe a little bit of the history and the build up to then what we're going to say here now is kind of the two core pillars of our answer to what it means to be most human or human nature at its best.
I love how you pointed out that we are optimistic idealists. I think that is definitely true. And it reminds me that this is just another example of a both and that I think characterizes our work. Because while we are optimistic idealists, on the one hand, we are also both practical realists.
Yes.
And we are thinking seriously about how do we actually build something in reality, taking that entrepreneurial problem solving first principles approach to creating something new in the world. So just another both and that we can throw in the mix for this conversation.
Yeah, thank you. I love that. And yeah, I mean, thank you for always adding in any points that I miss. I wasn't meaning to suggest
Oh
it
no,
wasn't
I
that.
didn't even
Yeah.
suggest that you missed it. It just occurred to me that it's just
Yeah,
another one of these
you're
beautiful
right.
both ends that
Yeah.
emerges when we think about the work that we're doing here.
And another key point I would add here of another reason why we wanted to go beyond just kind of merely defining human nature and seeing if that gives us an answer to why we need freedom. I would say yes, it does, but we're going to make the case even more why the most human version of our nature at our best is even more why we need freedom. We also wanted to transcend the kind of original sin view of human nature, as I'll call it, which is that most people, I think, kind of either consciously, explicitly, or just unconsciously, implicitly absorbing from the wider culture around us, which is unfortunately quite negative view of human nature, kind of, and a lot of it informed even from religion, which still is the dominant source of philosophy for most human beings, takes a view that we are sinful and fallen and imperfect by nature, kind of, you might even say evil. This even does touch a little bit on the question of good versus evil. Certainly, that's how most of the religion put up and defined human nature. And I certainly have never subscribed to that. It's probably one of the main reasons why I ultimately moved away from that view of human nature and the universe. But more importantly, it completely ignores the other half of the equation, which is the good side of human capacity and human nature. And so I think we wanted to frankly make the case for that positive, optimistic, good view. But I know, Joy, we both have had some good things to say. I would not also, but it's not to say we're taking the opposite side of that and saying that human nature is inherently good either. I think the best way, my own view, and I think this probably accords best with our understanding of human nature, is that we are neither good or evil inherently. We're kind of morally neutral, and it is our choice of what we make of ourselves that determines which path, which of those we go down. And so, and that even will be a tie into why we need freedom ultimately. But again, this is just, if anything else, we're at least just providing some counterbalance to what I think is largely a negative, misanthropic view of human nature.
Absolutely. I would say this is one of the first places we really are putting a philosophical stake in the ground and saying that as human beings, we are not by nature given evil nor good, but that we fundamentally have a choice. And just with that recognition, it implies freedom. You can't have a real choice if you don't have real freedom to choose one way or the other. If you were somehow predestined or preordained or somehow born either depraved
Morally
or
determined.
wonderfully
Yeah.
perfect, then you don't really have a choice. So a choice presupposes freedom. And I think that is even sort of the first kernel of freedom that we see here. And we're obviously going to connect that also then to political freedom as part of the expression of it. But this is just, I think, one of the really important ways that we are grounding our ideas of political freedom in what we recognize in a very philosophical way is an aspect of human nature, our nature as volitional beings who can choose evil or good.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's get into it. Now that we've kind of at least sketched out some of the basics of human nature as we see it, let's get into then what we ultimately then built off of from that to our view on human nature at its best. And just to tee it up, and then I'll turn it over to you. But talking through this and preparing for this discussion, and even when writing it, I think we ultimately landed on essentially two key aspects here, that stand out and that are, I guess, that we're going to define here as our quote unquote answer of what it means to be most human or human nature at our best. And those are tying it to the statement I read and the rest of Article 2, which we're going to get into. It's looking to these polarities or dualities of human nature and human capacity and trying to find the proper synthesis between them versus the false binary that most people see and that most thinkers have often described human nature by. And and finding that both in integration and then secondarily that key archetype that we hold as humanity's highest potential, the creator trader ideal, which is itself a kind of specific manifestation of this both and integration. So those, just at a high level, those are kind of the two key points. And so, Joy, I know you had some great things you wanted to say on both of them, so I'll turn it over to you to dive more into them.
I would say this is another aspect where we really make clear why our vision is a philosophical vision of liberalism, because we're really tying this into what truly is a wisdom tradition that dates back before the written language, before language at all. I mean, you can find this concept of the both and or the yin and yang as it's often expressed, going back in essentially prehistory. This is something that I think the wisest of human beings across different cultures have always recognized, that there is this tendency for humanity to lean toward one side of a what turns out to be a false dichotomy, and so much of wisdom is about integrating these seeming polarities, as you call them, these seeming dualities, and finding the integration of them. That this is really key to what makes for a flourishing life and a life where we're really able to realize our full potential. So for example, like we're going to talk about, some of these include like mind and body, reason and emotion. I would argue you can't really be a full human if you only have one half of those. That to really achieve, express, and realize your full potential, you want to figure out how to integrate these seeming polarities. And again, this is, ideas that go back to some of the oldest wisdom traditions that we know throughout human history, prehistory, that have also been corroborated by the best of our modern science, our modern understanding and research and thinking in psychology and obviously philosophy. And this is what really emerged
Neuroscience.
for
Oh,
us
yeah.
when
Mhm.
thinking about what does it take to really live a flourishing life in the deepest philosophical sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the way I think about it is the either or, you know, so many so many people often complain. There's a common debate, and even just in the culture, people often talk about either making things black and white or saying things aren't black and white. And even that, I think, speaks to a view of the world, that it's composed of competing poles or binary choices, either or, black or white, but the reality is we have both colors, right? They both exist in our world, or really no color and all colors, right? But we have them both, right? Both phenomenons. So it's not, in fact, either or, it's both and so I like to think of it as, and I loved how you put that, that the wisest humans throughout history have noted this point. Unfortunately, they have been often the few and far between, because I think most humans and most of our human knowledge still sees the world in kind of a false binary choice between one alternative or another. And so I think part of why we're staking this claim in the ground of what does it mean to be human nature at our best, it's synthesizing these seeming polarities, is, and the language there is key, it's seeming polarities because they're not in fact polarities, but they're complementary. And it's only when we see that they're complementary, and that by fusing them together, by combining rather than dividing, we get a lot more and we tap into our fullest potential, to your point. And just using the other polarities that we highlight in our statement, we are beings of both mind and body, reason and emotion. We're individual and social. We require stability, but also progress. And, so all of these are aspects of the human condition, the human capacity, the human potential, and you can't have one without the other. Or at least if you do, you're not going to be fully human, most human nature at our best.
I would just add a little bit of nuance to this to make the point that while we're absolutely stressing the both and here, we also see the value of the either or. Certainly, this is key to our cognition and how we think. I can share, even as a coach, so much of the best work that I do with clients involves having them make key distinctions where they had not made distinctions before. That being able to see differences is a huge part of how we think. But I guess you could say this is just another example of a both and, because it's both the both ands and the either ors. It's
Yeah.
both the integration and the differentiation and making distinctions, and that we really do need both. So just again, back to the point of it really is just another both and.
Yeah, that's a great point. And again, I'll just clarify, my statement here was really in this context of trying to understand human nature at our best. I think too often we understand the collective or common understanding of human nature. It may not even be focused on nature at its best, just human nature, and as we said earlier, usually in a negative connotation. But B, and part of I think this feeds into the negative, is that they tend to see that we're at war with ourselves, right? That it's mind or the body, it's the reason or the emotion, and that seeing it in that false, in this case, I think it's a false alternative, and that it's in that very error of understanding about our nature, about our identity, that we actually need both, that we have both, that creates a lot of the problems and distractions or confusions and conflicts, inner and outwardly, that we humans face. And so again, this by putting a stake in the ground for an alternative understanding here, this is our way to hopefully transcend above that and beyond that into a better, more human, most human view.
I think that's spot on. That when we're really talking about how one lives a flourishing life, a life of excellence, this is, I think, where all the philosophers really have centered on this important point of recognizing the importance of transcending these seeming polarities. It would be a really interesting question why it is that for essentially all of human history, it has been the case that it's only those who aspire to the levels of wisdom that grasp this point. It's something that I don't yet have an answer to, but I feel we see examples of it all the time in our current culture. If you just think of what our current social media influencer culture is like, that in order to grab attention, everyone has to make these incredible, stark statements that are very much black and white and not nuanced at all. And admittedly, I think the nuance is more difficult. The both and can be more difficult. I would say, I guess perhaps that's part of the reason, is that on one hand, it's perhaps easier as a human being to make a distinction and then go down just one path, but that to because it's not even clear always how you bring black and white together. There are definitely more than 50 shades of gray, despite what the book and the movie suggest. And it's always a real project even to figure out the best way to integrate for you as an individual at a certain point in your life, in a certain situation. So it definitely requires work, but we're definitely going to make the argument that it is work that we believe is well worth doing.
Yeah, well said. And my own knee-jerk initial answer to your question of why is kind of what you just touched upon or alluded to, which is uh, I would venture to guess there's an evolutionary basis to kind of the cognitive simplicity of seeing things either or. I mean, frankly, look at our entire computing system. It's built on zeros and ones,
Mhm.
right? So, which is itself kind of a simple on or off, either or construction. It's not an accident, I don't think, that we've built our digital world with that kind of framework and architecture. And it creates obviously great efficiency and computing cognitive power, but we are not just computers. And I think that's another key point here
Mhm.
to understand what does it mean to be most human is we designed the computers and we can design things that are much grander and more complex and nuanced than simple 0 1 equations and the computers that are built on them.
That's beautifully said. So why don't you take us to where we're going next?
Well, did you want to say anything else about our second kind of plank here about the specific and first both and integration, which is our creator trader archetype, that's kind of like another core aspect of just what we mean by human nature at our best?
Sure. So let's just briefly tease what it is that we have coming up so that the audience we have following along with us knows what to expect throughout the next several episodes, really, as we start to explore the both ands that we've put on the table here. And the first one is the one that I think you and I have recognized as being the most important, certainly the most important for the Freedom Project, and maybe even arguably the most important for identifying in a brief summary way what it really means, this idea of human nature at our best. This idea of the creator trader is something that you and I have been working on and talking through and developing for like over 10 years now, I
Yeah.
think.
I think it's close
It's
to
gone
15.
through
Yeah.
several iterations and development, but only because I think it is so important. And we're definitely going to spend a full episode just on the creator trader, and wouldn't be even surprised if we end up going over into more than one episode just on creator trader, because it is so important and it does in a real way combine the other both ands that we've identified and put in the statement. And so, and then there's just four others. And as I've said, you and I have talked about so many of these both and phenomenon that are so important to human flourishing and greatness, that I wouldn't be surprised if we end up revising our statement and adding a few more in.
Yes, well said. Well, that's a good preview, and it actually sets us up even for the next episode where we're going to dive into the first of our five both and polarities that we laid out here in Article 1, which is this creator trader archetype. So we'll spare you the full deep dive now, and just note that that's what we will be discussing next. So you have a lot to look forward to since we've kind of introduced it here. I guess I would just now that we've kind of taken you on the full journey of how we then ultimately started off and just defining human nature and then even getting to this better grander view of human nature at our best, how it ties back to freedom. And I think we kind of touched upon it briefly at the beginning, that there's kind of two aspects to freedom that are most significant here. There's the metaphysical aspect of just the choice, to choose your path of good or evil, um, of embracing the polarities or seeing kind of the either or binaries, distinctions. Um, and then there's the political freedom part, having the actual freedom to act upon those choices. And I think there's a parallel here then once we even understand human nature at our best as to why we need freedom. Because on the one hand, metaphysically, I would argue again, when we can fully understand and transcend that false alternative understanding of human nature that puts these different parts of who we are and what our powers and capacities are against each other, that in and of itself, I think, hinders our capacity to achieve our full potential, because then we're literally at war with ourselves. So just even having this alternative mental model and understanding of human nature gives us a roadmap to overcome that conflict and confusion, and therefore gives us the freedom to pursue our flourishing and greatness and the full potential that we need. And then, as you so eloquently put it just a minute ago, that freedom to choose also then, and what to focus on also then presupposes that you have kind of the external freedom to act upon those choices, which really here is political freedom, right? Because it's really only the actions or force and coercion of others that can really hinder you from acting upon that choice once you make that choice. So here too, a kind of understanding human nature at our best liberates us to pursue and actualize that best. But then we also need the freedom, the political freedom I guess the way you could say it is that political freedom is really the leverage or the hinge point to really realize that vision of full potential of human nature at our best.
The way I see it, I would make a connection to a point that we've made, I think, in a couple episodes earlier now, where we've talked about freedom as both the means and the end. And I think this is just another example of this. So, as we've been describing this, we've pointed out how we've started here with the foundations in human nature at our best, with this more ontological, metaphysical view of freedom. And in a sense, political freedom rests on top of, comes after that view of that, primary freedom to choose good or evil. But there is a real way in which, as you're pointing out here, without a certain amount of that political freedom, you don't even have the ability to make this choice for good and evil, and you certainly don't have that the ability to live it out in any full sort of way that you and I wouldn't have been able to come up with these ideas if we didn't have a certain amount of political freedom to have the ability to speak freely and talk freely amongst ourselves, to have freedom of association, to have freedom of communication, to develop these ideas. And we're certainly not saying that freedom is necessary in the sense of, there have certainly been wonderful heroes throughout history. We've identified even several of them in our episode thinking about exemplars of greatness. Individuals who have been heroic precisely in their resistance to tyranny in situations where they did not have political freedom. I think of people like Frederick Douglass, who lived through slavery, Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust, Ayn Rand, who escaped from the tyranny of communist Russia. But even there, it occurs to me that all of these people, we really only know them and know their work precisely because they were able to get out of all of those horribly oppressive systems and situations. And so much of their heroism was about resisting that tyranny until they were able to get to a point of better freedom. And truly, it is the way that, we can't really fully express and realize our potential to make choices that aim toward goodness and greatness without that certain amount of political freedom, without life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as our founders beautifully put it.
Wonderfully said. Yeah, uh it really is both the means and the end. I was gonna make a point and it totally just escaped me. We'll have to come back to it, but it is a means and an end in that this is what animates our work. To we've made this point in different ways in the past, but just that this is why we focus on, even here it's a means and an end, in the sense that we focus on freedom because it's how we ultimately achieve this ideal of human nature at our best, the three core values of living a free, flourishing, and excellent life of greatness and full potential. But it's also because we realize that freedom is necessary for those, that we also need to focus on freedom, and why we've set out upon this project to build a freer society and to promote the values that underpin it. So, this just again ties it back to why we pursue freedom, and why it's why, oh, that's the point I was going to make, that metaphysics, we talked about a lot of different kinds of freedom, but why we think certainly the first primary metaphysical choice, freedom, but then also political freedom, are probably the two most important types of freedom we need to achieve this ideal of human nature at our best, and therefore why our project and our organization, our company even, is focused on advancing those two types of freedom.
So, anything else before we close up this conversation?
I think we covered most of it, just again that focusing on freedom, this is what it's all about, so that we can become our most human selves, realize human nature, live according to human nature at our best, and realize our full potential as beings, as creator traders, pursuing continuous betterment and the Renaissance human ideal of freedom, flourishing, and greatness. That's kind of ties it all together. And now we're going to get into each of those individual ideals in the episodes to come, starting off with that first and foremost archetype of the creator trader, why we started with it, why it is kind of the overarching both and integration and archetype that we think is the highest form, how it ties into our entrepreneurial work and vision and what we're trying to do with 1776 forward here, as well as the Substack and all of that good stuff. So that's just a preview for what awaits you in the next episode. And unless you have anything else to add, we can just move into the call to action.
I think that sets us up perfectly for the call to action, because what we really want to do is to challenge all of you in our audience to think about this concept of the both and integration, to focus on one of these both ands. It could be one from our list if you read through our statement, but we would love to even hear, as you perhaps thought in your own life, an example of one of these both ands that has been important and animating in your own life. And then to really make a commitment to showing up in the world and living that way for a week, and what that could do. And we've talked about having these concepts of both self leadership and leadership in community. So to think about how pursuing one of these both and integrations can help you out in your personal life in the terms of self leadership, and then also how that helps you show up in a better way for whatever community it is you might lead, whether that's a company, a family, a community organization, how you can bring the wisdom of one of these both and integrations to your life in this coming week.
I love it. And like we said, because I don't know, personally, this was a novel concept and conception of human nature and understanding, even when we developed it. So, and came upon it. So hopefully it makes sense to all of you out there listening and watching along, but it's definitely not common. And so it does take a little bit of practice and thinking through. So I love this exercise because I hope that it will spur all of you out there to really start to see the both and integrations, at least in human identity and nature. And hopefully it helps you overcome some of those false binaries and kind of inner conflicts that understanding, that incomplete understanding of human nature has posed for so many of us.
And then we'll see everybody in 2 weeks to explore the one that Chris and I think is the most important of these, the creator trader.
Creator trader, can't wait. Thanks, Joia.
See you then.
See you then.